Aloha, everybody, and welcome to this episode of the FFF podcast, Faith and Family First. I'm your host, Eva Andrade, and I'm here with my special guest, Fritz Rolfing, because we're going to do what we've been doing annually for the last couple of years, is we're going to commiserate on what's happened on the Hawaii elections that just happened, the primary elections. And I can tell you in 2 words what my overall thought was in the primary. Not surprised. Let's chat about that. Fritz, thank you so much for joining me today on the show.
My pleasure, Eva. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, I love talking to you about this kind of stuff because you're a man after my own heart because you like charts and numbers as much as I do.
We share a common interest in charts and numbers.
Even though, when we're looking at this past primary, I don't think you weren't surprised either, were you?
Not really. I was somewhat surprised that Clayton, he lost pretty convincingly, I guess. Other than that, no.
All right. So before we jump into all the detail, because I know that you've got some thoughts, the last thing that I want to talk about is because I have not heard this in any of the news. Now, they have talked about how the count is lower. But when I did this chart that I'm also going to provide, I did the breakdown between Democrats and Republicans. And the Republican vote in the primary actually went up from the 2022 election. Not by a whole lot, but the Democratic vote went down in the primary.
Yep.
But the Republican vote did go up. And so I think that that's a small win for the Republican Party if they're trying to get people out to the polls.
Yep.
Small win. You're not going to hear anybody else say that anywhere else, but you heard it here first. Yeah, so I think that that's a good thing. I mean, it is sad that for the primary, other than the fact that sometimes during an election year when you have a presidential election, this seems to be a pattern.
Yeah, that's just inevitable. It's gonna dip because you don't have a primary for the president, right?
Yep.
So that's why the primary election is always going to be lower.
Yep. And what is your thoughts? Because, the other thing that people complain about is they really hate that they have to pick a party when they vote in the primary.
I know.
Is that something like maybe we should all be talking about making that change? Or do you think that it's worth it to continue a partisan primary?
I think it is good to have people choose a party. It makes sense. The question really would be, do you go to an open? Either you go to top 2, right, regardless of party.
Oh, God.
Right?
Yeah, that would be bad.
Which will help the majority party more than any minority party, right? Because it will block out minority parties from being on the general election ballot, right? So I don't think that that's a great idea. But it certainly would force any candidate. You don't just get a free ride just because you are in a minority party, Republican Party or whatever, but it's still not optimal at all. So that's not good. And so your alternative is you can hopscotch between what party you choose to be in for the primary, but that doesn't make a lot of sense either because the idea is you pick a party and you're going to have your nominee for that party. That's what you're choosing. So you shouldn't be playing in everybody else's
backyard.
one. I mean, you can. It's not. You don't have to state your party preference at the ballot. At the polling site as you did in the 60s and I think all the way into the 70s. So in that way, it allows people to pick, without having everybody knowing what party they are in. So I think what we have now, it's not ideal. It's never ideal how it gets set up, but I think it's probably the best for right now.
You know what would be ideal? That we had great candidates in every race.
Yeah.
Because then people would gladly go down the list and be able to pick, but people always complain to me and I make a joke of it, but it came to pass. I mean, it was almost prophetic, this having Satan and the Antichrist on your ballot. I mean, and that, let's jump into the first race that everybody has been talking about, which is the ouster of Scott Saiki, which is a Speaker of the House. That was a very interesting race. Although you and I were talking about this, neither of us were really that surprised.
Not totally surprised. It had Kim Koko Iwamoto had always run a competitive race against Scott Saiki, and it was probably just a matter of time, and this was the time, and I'm sure from what I saw, all the signs, I live close to that district. I drive through it all the time. Speaker Saiki got his signs everywhere. I'm sure he put a lot of effort in mailing, his voters. I don't know how much personal contact, but it's heavy condos. Anyways, it's hard to get direct, person to person. Oh yeah.
Which is, Jim and I talked about that on the last show. I believe that's why Kim won, because Kim made that an issue.
Well, that's true.
And that is a huge issue for people.
That was smart politics. Definitely smart politics.
Well, I was telling Jim, for me personally, I got a notice that I was paying $550 a month for my condominium insurance. It went up to $1,089.
Yeah, well, our homeowners insurance, I think, has doubled since last year.
I know.
So that's the same thing. It's not just condos getting hit, but I think condos feel the impact more because, you thought I have a less expensive place to live in, and now my expenses are jumping way up.
Oh yeah, I don't know how, and the economy. Some of these candidates that won made those kind of things their priority, and I think that was resonating with the voters.
Oh yeah.
The other thing that's interesting about this race too is there were only 145 blank votes. So the people in that district knew exactly what they were, and only 2 overvotes. So the people in this district, they were making a very clear choice of whether it was Scott Saiki or Kim Koko Iwamoto. So
they were motivated voters. They decided who they were going to support, and they did.
Yeah, and that was
for that person.
Super close. So even if all the blank votes had gone for Scott Saiki, Kim still would have taken it.
Yep.
So it's very interesting on that particular race. Okay, so let's look
she won pretty convincingly on this one.
I do want to make a clarification for some people out there, because there were some people that were emailing me and calling me thinking that Kim Koko Iwamoto is now going to be Speaker of the House. That is not how that works. No. Kim Koko Iwamoto is not going to be the Speaker of the House unless Kim can get 25, or is it 26? It would be 25 because she'd be the 26th.
Yeah.
So
she's 25 other than herself, and one other member of the House. One other member
would have to vote for that. I mean, so I guess it's not off the table because we all know Kim knows how to work the room. Kim's been around for a long time, has held several positions. So
I think it's unlikely for a freshman to
the talk is that
it's the speaker.
The talk is it's going to be the representative from Kauai, I think, is what some of the I know we don't, because we do not believe, neither of us believe in gambling, but I guess some gambling people think that is one of the names that's in the race. Okay, well, we've got, I'm sure there are other races in here that you want to talk about.
Well, the race out at the North Shore, where there's a Republican who is the incumbent senator, Brenton Ava. He didn't have any primary opposition, but he still got an impressive number of votes, for the Republican. The Republicans generally in many areas of the state really lag far behind the Democratic primary votes, right? Doesn't really matter in terms of what happens in the primary because whoever gets the most in their party is going to be the nominee. You don't have to get more votes than the people in the other party, but it still kind of gives you an indication of how many people are in that party, and are they going to stick? They're probably going to stick with that party, into the general, especially if it's somebody that they had voted for. And he got over 2,300 votes in that primary.
And that was 82% of the. He was one of the higher ones in the Republican side of taking the votes. I mean,
that means the people in his party know who he is and they like him because they voted. They even voted for him even though he didn't have any opponents. So they could have just left it blank and he would still be the nominee. And then Mr. Schaefer, Ben Schaefer, had over 50% of the Democratic primary votes, and that's even counting the blank votes, right? That's why I love our election office and how they give you that. So
okay, I'm one of the few people that tell people that if they really cannot pick, to just leave that race blank, to go ahead and vote on the rest of the
I think
races,
that's fine
because it can be a protest vote,
right?
And in some of these cases, I don't know if we'll have time to get into it today because there are several races, but there were some of them that the blank votes were quite high. And if I were the person that won for that particular party and I saw that many blank votes, I would use that as an opportunity to, like you said, introduce myself to the district. It means maybe they don't know who I am, but there is some work. There is a call to action on both Democrats and Republicans in some of these districts to get out there.
And one I just point out would be the State Senate District 6 on the west side of Maui. Angus McKelvey, who's been in office in the State House and now in the State Senate, he only got 75% of the ballots, just a little less than 75%. So you had almost 24% blank in that. To me, those are people that they either don't know him or they've decided that he's not their guy, even though he's won his primary. He'll face a Republican challenger now, Sheila Walker, but she had a lot of blank votes too. I mean, her own party members don't know her well enough too. But that's always, like you said, that's always an opportunity for the opposing candidate. If an incumbent has a lot of blanks, that's an opportunity.
I agree.
It's not a guarantee.
I agree.
Those people may still be blank even at the general election.
It's so true. Yeah. Another the Senate District 22, I want to talk about that one briefly because that was an interesting. There were no Republicans in that race. It was two Dems. Cedric Gates, who was in the House, who was trying to get this seat, running against Stacey Lynn Eli. That was only an 84 vote difference.
Right.
And there were 175 blank votes. So in that district, should those blank votes have gone for Stacey Lynn Eli, we would have a very different printout over here. And I will tell you, I know a lot of people on the west side, and they were really hitting the pavement for Stacey Lynn.
Interesting.
So this was a very interesting race.
That was
to
close,
watch.
but there is a Republican nominee, and I think she'll run a strong race. She has
not in 22. Cedric won outright.
What about Samantha DeCourt?
Oh, wait, what? Am I looking at this? No, she's. Oh, yeah, you're right.
Yeah,
you're right. I'm sorry. Good catch.
Yep.
For those of the do not know, show them that paper.
This
that's what. Yeah. So and to me, I would do this differently if I was designing this.
Yeah. This is not user friendly at all.
Yes, but you're right. So it'll be interesting. Good. So he didn't win outright. He does have a race. Good. Yeah. Well, not good. I'm not taking a position.
Unlike the Psyche Iwamoto race. There is no Republican nominee. Nobody signed up to run in that district as any party other than the Democratic Party. So that primary decided.
And the same thing on the Republican side between Medeiros and Souza.
Okay.
Kanani Souza won outright. So that's another. That's the only. That's the only one where you had no Democrat in the race. It was just two
very unusual
Republicans running against each other. Yes. So, and that's why we do tell people you do need to vote in the primary.
Exactly.
Because in cases like this, there's no second chance.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it.
Okay. So what else did you pick up?
I mean, those were the main the main things. I mean, the other impression is no big surprise is that the Democratic Party, Democratic candidates continue to be very strong overall. They don't have competition, or if they do, it looks like there's so many Democrat Party primary votes for them that it's unlikely that challenger is going to be able to be successful. It doesn't give you a lot of hope. So there's a handful of districts in the House and a couple in the state Senate where I think, the Republicans have an opportunity. One of those is that District 22 that Cedric Gates won the Democrat primary, and Samantha DeCourt won the Republican primary. So, that's one, and I think it's very likely, not very likely, it's likely, I think, that Brenton Ava will hold on to his seat. So there may be 3 Republicans in the state Senate. That doesn't sound like a lot, but it's a lot better than none.
In fact, I remember, so back in the early 2000s, when I think there were 19 Republicans in the House, wasn't there 3 senators then? There was Slom, or is it Sloan?
It's Sloan, I think.
And then
Gabbard was a Republican.
Gabbard was a Republican at the time. There was one
Fred
more.
Hemmings, perhaps.
Hemmings, yeah. So
that's true.
We can get there.
Yeah, no, if you get there, at least you. I mean, I go way back, and
I would love to. I know
I had a family member in the state Senate back in the 60s and 70s, and I mean. Well, coming out of statehood, the statehood election, Republicans had the majority in the state Senate. Nobody ever talks about that. Nobody ever knows it because they think 1954, that was it.
Yes,
that was the end. No, it took a long time for the Democratic Party to gain the hegemony over.
I remember, it's like, I love telling this story. It's a true story. So when I went to Starve the Sea High School my freshman year, debate was mandatory, right? So it's my freshman year. It's 1970. When was this? 77, I guess. And the first thing we did was we were going to learn impromptu speech. And so what she said is, okay, I'm going to have, it was a literal black hat. She goes, we're going to put current events in the black hat. You're going to pick an event out and you're going to do a 3-minute impromptu speech on this. Now, mind you, I mean, when you're 14 or 15 years old, do you really know much about politics? And this was politics. And so when the hat came to me, my last name Andrade, so of course I was the first, I pull out and it said Frank Fosse. Oh. And so I proceeded to give a 3-minute speech on Frank Fosse. And
was it pro or con, or?
It was pro, of course.
Okay. Right.
But here's the funny thing, and so you'll love this story. So I give this speech, and then teacher graded us right away. And she goes, I'm going to give you an A. And let me tell you why I'm going to give you an A. She goes, nothing you said about Frank Fosse was accurate, but it made me want to vote for him. And she goes, I know him.
That tells you
so I met
a lot
him,
about politics.
Right? When we all got, back in the early 90s, when I met all of you and we started getting involved on this, I met Frank Fosse. Him with his little shaka bumper sticker. You remember that? I told him the story, and he goes, maybe I should have had you as my campaign manager. Because really, politics in Hawaii, going back to you talking about having a relative in there, politics back in those days was different.
Oh, yeah. It was
very different.
More personal.
Yeah. If you knew somebody. I mean, my mom and dad signed Wade for Ben Caetano.
Yeah.
So, I mean, many things change. And they would tell you today that they wouldn't pull a Democratic ticket if they got paid. See, things change. I noticed in these printouts, Fritz, there were several races where the blank votes were quite high. Yep. Like I noticed in, this is in District 15, State Representative District 15. The Republican had a 45.7% blank votes.
Yeah.
And so this would be a great opportunity for David Morantz, who is the candidate there, to get out there and really introduce himself to the community on that.
Needs to do that. Gotta knock on doors and find all those folks.
Mm-hmm. And then going down.
His opponent, by the way, is also a leading candidate to become Speaker of the House.
Oh, yes. Yeah. That was another name I did have. And that's Nadine Nakamura for those that are listening. Yeah. And even she had 20% blank votes.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
it's like that district to me, if I was a person that was going to like motivate specific communities, I'd be looking at this community as one to really educate people on getting involved. Another high one was in State Representative District 17. The Republican there had 45.6% blank votes.
Yeah.
And running against D. Morikawa, who had 24% blank votes. Another district that is ripe for education out there. So those of you living in those, I don't know all of these districts by heart, so I can't tell you. Oh, that's Mapuna Puna or whatever. I don't know.
These are Kauai.
Oh, those. See, Fritz knows. That's why I have you on the show, because you know these things.
If I don't recognize the district itself, because they don't in this chart, it doesn't explain where the district is, even the island of it. So you kind of gotta know.
They should have. To me, it should be, here's the district, and then there's too many lines separating.
Yeah.
It's, and then the other thing that would be helpful.
And they're not grouping it by race, right? You just got to go through and figure out which ones have the number that's for that district.
Exactly. And so I think another helpful thing that might be good for people is explain to people about moving to the general election, because I notice people are confused about that too. Like, there are several races here where you have a libertarian person, you have Aloha Aina party and all that. So those people obviously won outright too, because they're in these parties. They didn't have anybody. So
they'll be on the general election ballot. Yeah. Regardless of if they only got one vote, if they are one of those parties and they were on the ballot, they qualify to run. They are in the general election. So that's one thing that Hawaii does allow, and it's easier for small parties to be on the general election ballot than in other states.
Now, does that include the congressional races too?
Yeah.
Yeah,
it does. But there is an interesting thing about those small parties, and this is almost esoteric, but there's also this nonpartisan category. You can run as a nonpartisan. It always sounds good, right? I don't really like either of the parties. I want to be a nonpartisan. But there's a minimum percentage that you have to hit in order to qualify for the general election, that it does not apply to any other political party, Democrat, Republican, Libertarian, Green, Aloha Aina. That does not apply. It applies only in the nonpartisan, and it's a percentage, and I've got to go look at what it is of the party that is actually the lowest party vote. So if you had a nonpartisan race and you had a Democratic nominee and a Republican nomination race, or one person running, if you're the nonpartisan, I think you need to get at least 10% of what that Republican got. The Republican having the lower number of votes, but you would need to have 10% of that number, something like that. It's a percentage that they got in order for you to go to the general election. So the only time you really see nonpartisans is if there are third parties there, because the third parties generally get only a few votes in the primary, right? Mm-hmm. And then that's when the nonpartisan might have a chance to get within the striking distance of the third party, and therefore qualify for the final ballot.
Okay,
but it's like this little quirky nuance in Hawaii. It's been here in our politics at least since statehood, but no nonpartisans have qualified for, again, in the governor's race, usually the bigger races when you have the other parties, third parties in, but nobody has really capitalized on it,
So that's interesting, because if you look at the Senate, the U.S. senatorial race, right? I think that there is one there, right? There's that John Jeffrey.
Yes.
And he got 15.8% of the vote
of his party. Of his party, right. Now that's interesting. This number it's a weird number, because it's not.
It would be.
It's
the total
not
vote.
only it's not only. I'm wondering how they come up with that percentage where they're working off of, because there were more blank nonpartisans. How does that happen? Then there were people that voted for the one nonpartisan candidate there, you know. But it's possible he may, Jeffrey may have qualified for the general election because there were other small parties there too.
21% for Shelby Pikachu billionaire.
Yeah.
There's a name for you.
Is that a real name? I don't think so. I think somebody
said that Darth Vader has turned up on some of the states' ballots. I think it's fascinating. Well, so unfortunately, we are only down to a couple more minutes. So was there any other like big thing that jumped out at you that you want to go over before we people are like going to leave this show going, and I'm sorry, we don't have any.
I think maybe one thing is worth mentioning, and that is, well, this again, the power of incumbency is clear, and even Republican incumbents have that benefit because they normally won't have challengers in the primary, and in some cases they don't even have Democrat challengers. And that's also the case with the council, city council. That's nonpartisan. So those are true. The primary is a runoff type of, or not. It's I guess the first scrum, and the top two candidates, nonpartisan because they're just all nonpartisan. They don't have R's or D's or anything next to their name. But there was no challenger for Augie Tulba.
Yeah.
And there was no challenger for Uwale, right? I'm sorry. I'm remembering her maiden name.
Andrea Topola.
Andrea Topola.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And
Radiant Cordero too, right?
Yeah, so they're elected outright. They as long as they got one vote.
And Steve Alm too, prosecuting attorney.
Yes, yeah. Since there was no opposition, they go in. If they get 50%, even if they have opposition, if they have over 50%, which is what Scott Nishimoto got.
Yeah. In
the Manoa Macaulay area, he's elected as a city councilman. So that's interesting, is that there weren't a lot of competitive races in the city, in the mayor's race or the city council race. There were candidates for mayor. I'm glad, people signed up, but Mayor Blangiardi has done a good enough. Yes. He's done a good enough job to.
People were just, and that was another race. People were very clear that this is what they wanted.
Yep.
So our call to action actually is prepare for the general election. We want to get people involved because the general election, because you're going to be voting for president of the United States, is huge. And I think that everybody needs to turn out. I would love for this to be a massive Hawaii campaign where Hawaii probably is going to vote Democrat based on the charts and everything. I mean, everyone's calling it for Kamala Harris here in the state of Hawaii. I know there's a lot of Trump supporters out there. Here's the thing, get out and vote. That's what we're encouraging everybody to do.
Yep.
We do appreciate you spending time with us today. And we want you to like, share, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you know every time we upload a new video. And we will have Fritz back after the general election.
But
we're going to have him back before that because he's going to help us look at the constitutional amendment questions.
Yeah.
Because that's another big thing. You're going to have a very important question that you're going to need to answer. So we will see you all next time. Mahalo, everybody.
Mahalo.